But first, after 18 months of gallivanting around the world and talking endlessly about his toxic voice proposal, Anthony Albanese has decided to focus on the cost of a living crisis, afflicting a growing number of Australians. This belated awakening to the single biggest issue in the country has only come about after the voice was emphatically rejected in every state and territory except the ACT, and Airbus Albo's popularity took a significant hit. A number of post-referendum polls showed that support for Labor, their unofficial coalition partner, the Greens, and the Prime Minister are heading south, while the coalition and other centre-right parties are seeing an increase in support. Even the latest left-leaning Essential poll, courtesy of The Guardian, demonstrates the shift in the national mood. I brought you that data Tuesday, but just to recap quickly, Labor's primary fell further to 32%, while the Greens fell from 14% to 10%. Meanwhile, the coalition primary vote went up, as did One Nations and United Australia and other minor parties. But more importantly than that data is the question about the national mood. Essential found only 1 in 3 Australians believe the country is heading in the right direction, with around half saying we are very much on the wrong track and 18% unsure. This data is in line with polling released last week by Roy Morgan, showing primary support for Labor down 3 points to 32% and support for the coalition rising to 36%. And the coalition leading Labor 50.5 to 49.5 on a two-party preferred basis. And again, there was a clear majority saying the country is heading in the wrong direction, with only 1 in 3 saying we are on the right track. And it appears the Prime Minister has taken note. We're likely to see a different Anthony Albanese in the coming months as he works to convince Australians he understands and shares their concerns for the country. At a speech at the Australian Melbourne Institute of Economic and Social Outlook conference this afternoon, the Prime Minister vowed to make cost of living his top priority.
We know that a stronger budget position serves as an important buffer against international shocks, and it helps put downward pressure on inflation. We cannot isolate ourselves from the challenges and uncertainties that we see around us. What we can do, indeed what we must do, is invest in our nation's capacity to meet them. Because being engaged in the global economy doesn't mean outsourcing our destiny.
But we are outsourcing our destiny, including our energy security. The push for unreliable, expensive, renewable energy is not only seeing costs soar for businesses and households alike, but we're becoming increasingly dependent on supply chains largely controlled by China. Today, Treasurer Jim Chalmers also spoke at the Economic and Social Outlook conference, warning that we cannot meet our bold emission targets without greater intervention from governments.
While important building blocks are now in place and progress has been made, we will need to do even more to secure sufficient renewable energy generation, transmission and storage to meet our ambitions. Without more decisive action across all levels of government, working with investors and industry and communities, the energy transition could fall short of what the country needs.
That's bad news, folks. I can translate what the Treasurer means there, and it's a nice way of saying these dud projects are not commercially viable and more of your hard-earned tax dollars will go into propping them up and, of course, enriching the 0.01%. It's time the Peter Dutton-led coalition recognised the enormous error it made, an error made under Scott Morrison's leadership. They signed up to net zero, the same economy-destroying lunacy offered by their opposition. It made it very difficult to fight the last election on energy policy or cost of living concerns. One of the many lessons from the Voice debate is that Australians deserve a true contest of ideas, and the coalition will only prevail when they clearly articulate their position and differentiate their policies from Labor and the Greens. It's a point former Prime Minister Tony Abbott emphasised in a speech overnight, telling a London audience that when energy and climate policy had a big election focus, the electorate always opts for the hip pocket.
For 2 decades, we have run our power system not to produce affordable and reliable power, but to reduce emissions. And people say that this has to be the case because it's what the public demand. There is, it said, an unstoppable transition on, and anyone who doesn't go with that is not only standing in the way of history, but is courting immediate political danger. But I have to say that on every occasion in Australia where energy policy and climate policy has been a big election focus, it's the people who have been on the sceptical end of the spectrum who have done well. On every occasion when the Australian public have been asked to choose between reducing emissions and protecting their cost of living, they've put their cost of living first.
They put cost of living first every single time. They weren't given that opportunity at the last federal election. Tony Abbott also called the Albanese government's policies unachievable and irrational.
The climate cult will eventually be discredited. I just hope we don't have to endure an energy catastrophe before that happens. Now, I have to say that the current government's current energy policy is not just utterly irrational, but it is actually impossible.
In recent months, I have spoken to a number of senior shadow ministers and senior Liberal and National MPs on and off the record, sometimes on this station, and the message from almost all of them is clear. The coalition must abandon its net zero pledge.